Five Nights at Freddy's Into the Pit came out in time for FNAF's 10-year anniversary, and it is very good. There are already videos talking about the game and its story, but today I wanted to talk about what's not in the game and what I think happened behind the scenes. Before that, though, I think it's important to establish what both Scott Cawthon and the members of MegaCat Studios have said about development.
Talking to Meg, I mean, it's been years and years since that game has been in development. I really haven't had to give them. I have had to give them direction, but for the most part, it's been weird. They would go into the hole for 6, 7, 8 months at a time, and I wouldn't hear anything from them. An update, and it would just be all this crazy new stuff and all this crazy detail, this fluid animation. It's just crazy stuff. And then they'd go back into the hole again for 5, 6, 7 months. And then we just repeat that cycle.
Bexy, marketing director at MegaCat Studios, has been communicating heavily with fans on the MegaCat Studios Discord and has given a little bit of insight on how fans should be talking about the cut content in the game. Cut content is cool, but it's always cut for a reason, ultimately. Cut content is always cut for a reason. It's fun, but a look into brainstorming at best and isn't part of an intended narrative. Scott Cawthon also talked about the mistakes he made when collaborating with Steelwool on Security Breach and how he wanted to improve on those mistakes.
I had a very specific story in mind, and it is very different than the one that got in the game. And I think a part of that is the way that I conveyed that to Steelwool, because what I was trying to do was I was trying to tell Steelwool to do specific things throughout the game, put specific items in specific places, have specific characters do certain things. Meanwhile, I'm not telling them what Storyplot was, because in my head, I was thinking, okay, when people find this, they will connect this to this to this, and it will all be revealed. And I thought I could do that without telling Steelwool the story. That didn't work out very well, because they got all of these pieces, and they thought it was their job to connect them in a way that made sense. And again, I don't blame them for that. I blame myself for that, because I guess what I should have done is just said, hey, here's the story. Here's why these pieces are here. Here's how they're supposed to connect.
So we know that MegaCat Studios would develop Into the Pit for months at a time. They would show things to Scott, and Scott would give his reactions and directions. The game's development was going on for multiple years. But content is cut for a reason, and looking at it through data mining is like looking at the brainstorming process. Scott has learned to tell studios he collaborates with not to fill in the gaps of the story on their own. As others have already discovered via data mining, the secret minigames in Into the Pit were at some point in development meant to be about Vanessa/Vanny instead of the books. The minigames were reskinned. Remnants of these original minigames still exist in the source code via file names, script files, and remaining sprites which weren't replaced. The minigame that is a reference to the story Fetch was originally referred to as Lead Them, and involved Vanessa as the player character leading a group of children to William. The text in the game would say, Bring Them. Rather than the minigame ending with Fetch attacking the boy, this version would have ended with Vanessa having a mental break of some kind. There is even a sound in this minigame with the file name Mental Breakdown. The text would at some point change to Good Girl. The minigame based on the story To Be Beautiful was originally called Rebuild Them. Rather than you playing as Eleanor putting variants of children together, you would be playing as Vanessa putting the animatronics together. The pendant was originally a child that you were meant to bring to Chica, who would then start to glitch out. The minigame based on the story Count the Ways was called Party Cleanup, and involved Vanessa picking up pizza and cupcakes. The Funtime Freddy Bonbon arm that triggers the end of the minigame would have been a mess. This likely meant some kind of corpse or some other visual showcasing the aftermath of William killing someone or multiple people. In the final game, the book minigames are all playable and needed as part of getting the 3-star ending. However, there is a 4th minigame that is not in the final game, but still accessible through file manipulation. Don't Let Them Escape, referred to as Guard Duty in the source code, shows you playing as the same boy from the Fetch minigame. You try to give candy to the animatronics in an attempt to stop them from becoming red, but it all happens too fast and your movement gets slower and slower before you eventually just stop and the minigame ends. For further context, the minigame was apparently meant to be triggered by interacting with the Stitch Wraith, who would show up outside of Oswald's school. Keep in mind that the other minigames are triggered by getting 5 prize vouchers for the prize machine, calling your mom on night 5 in the past, and clicking multiple times on the candy machine. Those all seem like pretty arbitrary ways to trigger secret minigames, but the Stitch Wraith? He's a pretty important character in the books, and why are you playing as the boy from Fetch in Guard Duty? Looking into the source code shows that the player character was meant to be Vanny at one point, but if the sprite changed, then someone had to intentionally change the sprite for this minigame, right? Could it be that this isn't Greg from Fetch and instead another character like Andrew, who possesses both Fetch and the Stitch Wraith? Let's not get ahead of ourselves. In order to really understand what's going on here, we'll have to take an even closer look at the source code of the game. However, please understand that I barely even know the basics of programming and am not a game dev, but this is what I've been able to gauge from my limited knowledge. I would like to thank the users of the technical FNAF server on Discord for helping me out here. Also keep in mind that the decompiled version of the game is seemingly missing crucial code, which keeps us from actually playtesting the game. What I discovered is that in the Unity editor, the sprite of the player object in Guard Duty is still the Vanessa_creepy sprite, which is a sprite of Vanny. This didn't make sense to me considering that when we boot up the level, the player appears as Fetch Boy. And when you view the scene in sprite mask display mode, you can see that the player sprite is Vanny. All the sprite mask displays for all scenes show the sprites that appear in the final game. So it's odd that the player character for Guard Duty appears differently in the Unity editor than it does when you actually play the game. But I saw the Guard Duty minigame player behavior script file associated with the player object. And in that script, there's code relating to Lead Them. Again, Lead Them is actually the Fetch minigame. So that means that there's code for the Fetch minigame in the Guard minigame. So I think that in the Unity editor, the player object has Vanessa_creepy selected as its sprite, but there is a script that Megacat used that links the Guard Duty minigame with Lead Them, which later became Fetch. This code possibly overwrites what was set as the default sprite in the editor, and so because they changed Vanny to the boy in Lead Them, it does the same for Guard Duty, but it's possible that I'm wrong. There may be some other component that I'm missing that overwrites the sprite. I think the Fetch Boy being the player character in Guard Duty was never the intention of Megacat at any point during development. This was not some intentional artistic decision. Guard Duty was scrapped entirely. What we're seeing when we boot it up may just be a side effect of Lead Them being reskinned into Fetch. Guard Duty may have just got changed retroactively via the code, but ultimately, we're not meant to be playing or seeing this minigame. It's not part of the final game. So why the Stitch Wraith as a way to trigger that minigame? Well, again, the minigame triggers in the final game are arbitrary, so the Stitch Wraith trigger might not really mean anything. The reason why these Vanessa minigames were planned for this game is still a mystery. However, Bexy stated that she herself is a big fan of Vanny, and if we made a game with an original FNAF story, what story would you guys like to see? I really hope we get to do Vanny someday, but I know Steelwool has her covered, so who knows. Bexy saying she knows that Steelwool has Vanny's story covered implies that Megacat may have directly been told by Scott that all Vanny aspects of the story are being handled by Steelwool. One of the major criticisms against Security Breach was that Vanny didn't get a lot of screen time, but as more Steelwool games have come out, they've slowly been giving her a bit more focus. As Scott even said,
I've always really liked Vanny as a character. I don't think that Vanny was utilized to her fullest potential, and so hopefully we'll see another opportunity for Vanny to return as well. We'll see.
I think that Megacat brainstormed and developed these Vanny minigames to pitch to Scott. But when Scott saw them, he had to tell them that the minigames didn't line up with existing lore. Both parties came to the conclusion that converting them into book minigames would fit into the pit much better. Which then begs the question of how and why Megacat thought Vanessa would fit with this game, both thematically and timeline-wise. Based on casting info, Vanessa is in her 20s during the first movie, and that seems to be the same age range for the game counterpart. The differences in continuity, though, is when Vanessa was actually born. The FNAF movie takes place in the year 2000, while Security Breach takes place in the future. So Vanessa slash Vanny being present for Afton's murder would line up more with the movie continuity, and even then, she would still be a kid in 1985. My guess is that these minigames weren't meant to be entirely literal. Perhaps these were just meant to represent Vanessa's psyche and how she feels tied to Afton slash Malhair. These could have been some sort of nightmare from her perspective. However, that still brings up the question of why Mecha Cat would want Vanny minigames in a story that otherwise has nothing to do with her. My only real guess for that has to do with Into the Pit making several references to Alice in Wonderland. The original story references it directly, and there's cut dialogue in the game which references going down the rabbit hole. You're Oswald, and you've been going down the rabbit hole, the pit. The White Rabbit is an iconic character from that story, and that's exactly what some of the Vanny sprites were referred to as. The Vanny minigames being needed to complete the game would make sense under this idea. You would need to follow the White Rabbit, just like Alice did. I think that Mecha Cat may have wanted to use Vanny to further solidify the Alice in Wonderland connection, but then came to agreement with Scott that the reference was just a little too thin and would be overshadowed by fans' need to take certain lore elements literally. Despite whatever happened during development, I am glad that the book minigames are what we got. And I'm really happy with what Mecha Cat was able to pull off here. And I'm excited for any potential FNAF titles they make in the future. Who knows, maybe Scott will give them a chance to explore Vanny in a much more fleshed out way. Before you go though, I wanted to address the huge gap between the last video and this one. The truth is that I had been working on a pretty big FNAF-centered video for over a year, but there were multiple factors that delayed it, and I decided to put it on hold for now. Those factors include the length of the video, along with the fact that my laptop, which is years old, was struggling to handle the amount of editing, graphics, and visual effects I was trying to do for that video. Due to this, I have decided to resume making new, relatively shorter videos. Since I don't have the funds to update my editing system currently, I'm going to promote my Patreon and my Ko-fi. On Patreon, by pledging just $1 a month, you can support my endeavor for film and video creation, and doing so will get your name in every single one of my upcoming videos. If you decide to donate more money, not only will I be extremely thankful, but you'll also be given access to more benefits, such as getting videos early. If you want to make a one-time donation, then you can over at my Ko-fi, which will also get your name at the end of my videos. Like these people here. Thank you to all of these donors and anyone else who is considering donating. It truly means a lot to me. And thank you for watching. Genuinely.